Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session on lifelong learning and creative wellness. We've got an incredible panel of guests here joining, and we're going to dive into this topic. We may have some time towards the end for questions, so if you have some, start to think about that, I'll sort of cue you all up. We're also going to skip intros, and we're going to dive right into it. So you've got on the app, you've got everyone's bio, so we're just going to get into the meat of the discussion. And I think to start things off, we're going to talk about creative wellness as a concept. I think it isn't something it feels like it's a category, but it's also not a really well-defined category yet, which is an interesting opportunity. So maybe we can start things off. Mara, is it Mara? Yeah. I should have asked you that before. Mara, how do you think about and how do you define creative wellness?
Yeah, for me, it's about being a creative person and expressing creativity and maybe making art in a way that is balancing and wellness creating rather than sort of like life force sucking and burnout producing. And I think at Patreon, we definitely think about it as like you are making a better life because you are a creator, because you are putting creativity out into the world. So what it means for me, it means that balance, but also being a creative person and having some output.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? I want to talk about creative wellness as a workforce sort of tool.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. We're serving up lifelong learning content to the employers, to the companies now. And the reason they're taking it is because, we're all makers, we're all creators, right? And so when you make something, create something, you feel good about yourself. You're more productive. So now employers are really looking at lifelong learning content, bringing it into the workplace, serving it up to their employees so they have access to it, and it just makes people feel good. It's better all around. So when I think of wellness, I think of what lifelong learning can do for you.
David, with Book Club, how are you thinking about creative wellness in terms of connecting people? We're going to come back to this topic later, this sort of talent direct, connecting readers with authors. How does that enhance creative wellness for both, actually?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about creative wellness, there's been the internet has enabled a lot on the creative side, and I'd say we're just starting to mature into maybe the wellness side. And I think a lot of that is coming from community. And I think as we step back, if you look at, it's a really scary stat is like the number of Americans who belong to a club or community of any variety has gone like precipitously low. And so, as Americans, we used to belong to Rotary clubs and to bowling leagues and to for the first time ever in America, we are now under 50% participation in religious organizations for the first time ever. And so irrespective of your own faith, that was a backbone of community for us collectively as a society and as a country. And so our participation in community is coming down and down and down. And of course, we all know we inherently need that in our lives to build our humanity. And so what I think we're starting to see is the enablement of kind of a new generation and facilitation of community. And we're starting to see these online, offline kind of hybrid of community building. And so with Book Club, I hope that's part of what we're able to enable, which is I believe there's an enormous amount of non-consumption in book clubs, which is, how many of us do belong to a book club? And I don't know, raise of hands, how many of you are in a book club? So that's maybe 10% of the audience. Given the right circumstances, conditions, people, or topic, how many of you would enjoy being in a book club? And that's almost everyone. And so I do believe inherently there's just an enormous amount of non-consumption out there, which is, unless you had kind of the right neighbors, one of whom's an extrovert and happy enough to be the one to put themselves out there and organize people, and it just took a bunch of prerequisites to bring it together. But if all of a sudden, but what if the person down the street doesn't like reading the same science fiction as you do? I mean, it's just been hard. And so I believe we've got an opportunity to build real community around one of the best things we've ever invented as humans, which is great literature. So that's kind of our hope is by community we can provide that wellness.
That's awesome. And Spencer at Sonora, so you guys, it's quite an intensive undertaking for people to join your platform. You are creating a platform for people practicing skills. So as we sort of transition into the other side of this topic around lifelong learning, like what are you seeing in terms of the people that are signing up on your platform and their commitment to lifelong learning?
Yeah. So the way that we kind of see skill acquisition is it's tied directly to self-actualization, and I think for a lot of our students coming through the platform, they've sort of reached like all of their Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're stable in their lives, but they're feeling unfulfilled in some way, and a lot of that has to do with this creative wellness component. They're feeling the need, the sort of instinctual need to express something creatively, but their technical skills in this case, on an instrument, a musical instrument, aren't to the point where they can fully express themselves. So they feel limited, and it creates this almost existential need to get better. And that's really the primary motivator for why they come to us. They come to us, and we blend this sort of like heart-head education approach where they really learn the hard skills on an instrument in order to then express what's happening for them emotionally and in their lives. So we try and bridge that gap for them.
And for those of you, maybe Mario can start with you, who are seeing the people that have not fully adopted lifelong learning, what is potentially holding them back from sort of committing to that?
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation about this earlier of like, one of the blockers is maybe it's not personalized enough, or it's not the path that is like right for you as a student, right? Maybe it feels too generalized or too large. Spencer and I were talking this morning about the fact that your learning is more successful when you have that community, when you feel like there's not only accountability, but like a social component to what you're learning, right? So like Sonora has these cohorts. I think book club, if you find the right friend groups, right, like you want to learn more. So I think there's that twofold aspect of like, you don't feel kind of seen and have that attention. That's a big thing we see on Patreon is like that personalized aspect of a creator who's an educator really caring about you and giving you a very personal reward and benefit. And then that secondary aspect of like, do you feel like you're surrounded by people who are interested in learning and who are helping you learn, and do you have that community that's supporting you along the way?
Yeah, so I like to talk about this as the destination and the journey, right? So you find like a teacher you can learn from setting that destination, and then the journey is the people you're on with, that you're taking that next step with. So how important is, and maybe we can go to Cal, and I'd actually love to hear from each of you in your fields, the intimacy between the students and the creator.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. I agree with everything you're saying. Personalization, community, it's all about the engagement. But I think what's driving a lot of this is the platform itself, the technology. I think that you got to keep tweaking platforms out there to really engage with that consumer. And you talk about a customer journey. It really is. It's pretty easy to get people to find them, to at least try your content and experience it. But the key is keeping them on, keeping them interested, engaged. We do things like live events. We do one-on-ones with our instructors. Depending on what level of subscription you might have, you could be at a different aspect and a different ratio to the instructor. So I think there's a lot of things you can do to really create that personalization, that engagement. In my world, in the subscription world, it's all about the renewal. It's all about keeping those people. Again, it's easy to find someone and target them with the right content, but you need to do everything you can to keep them interested.
What does that dynamic look like on book club where, that ongoing engagement?
And so we opened with the thesis that like Goodreads already exists. There's already a social network for reading, and you can go find other readers and community. But what's missing is the author's voice and sort of the author's presence. And besides maybe some authors are on Twitter, and most authors, as a function of their publishing contract, have to have a personal website, but they tend to be like a WordPress, or like a Squarespace website with kind of 4 or 6 pages. In a world of Cameo and Masterclass and this sort of like increased breaking down of the wall and the sense of access to celebrity and we really felt like, well, author's voice is entirely missing. And unless you live in like New York or LA, and the Strand bookstore down the street from you, like most of us don't have access to authors. So their voice was really important to us. And I do believe is a powerful addition to the equation. One of the interesting things, Mark Zuckerberg really early in the journey said, he said the sad truth is people care more about an injured squirrel in their front yard than they do about a dying child halfway around the world. And like there's, I think, like a truth to that, which sort of like proximity brings like importance and relevance. And so there is also just a truth to like, in addition to the author's voice, like hearing your friend's opinion of a book or their take on, what transpired in the book is perhaps ultimately the voice you're going to care most about. So I think, both are important.
Spencer, the balance between recorded content and live content, obviously all live is not as scalable, but that helps with the intimacy. So how do you sort of see that balance with Sonora?
Yeah, we are a purely hybrid learning platform. So we, sort of similar to you, want to create this connection between the people who are top in the field and the folks who are on these learning paths. We think a lot about the principles of deliberate practice in the way that we architect that. So there are certain phases to the life cycle of a skill. There's, when you are first sort of absorbing the content, when you're integrating the content, and when you're retaining it. And there are moments along that life cycle that make a lot of sense to have a one-on-one interaction. Like when you get to the integration phase, it's really important that you get a master teacher to observe your playing and make adjustments. When you're just absorbing the content right in the beginning, it's not that important to have like content. Recorded content is way better for the absorption phase. Integration, really important to have a master teacher. Retention, software is better at spaced repetition. So there are moments where it's really key to have that. And then there's the inspirational aspect as well, which is where the kind of one-on-one lessons and that engagement is kind of creating momentum and creating this like aspirational experience where the student is motivated to continue down the path.
And I'd love to hear what you're seeing in Patreon.
It's interesting that it kind of seems like it's not enough now, or rather the content lands better if there's not only the content and what you're learning, but that connection to the educator, whether it's a creator or an educator, the connection to the author, the connection to the master teacher. Like it's different if you're in a college lecture and you're absorbing all this material, whereas nowadays I think that what we're seeing is the trend of actually caring about the person who's teaching and knowing their story. I think of like N.K. Jemisin as this very famous fantasy sci-fi novelist on Patreon. And it's not just enough to like read her work and learn and be absorbed in this fantasy world. You want to know about her as an author and how she sees her work and sees her writing. So it's this kind of shift of like, it's not just what you're learning, it's also that personal, intimate connection to the person that's making what you're absorbing as a learner.
Yeah, so sort of related to that, how are creators on your platform thinking about volume versus like LTV of individual?
Yeah, I think it's a struggle for online creators today, right? And different platforms, I think, incentivize different things. So on Patreon, we really think about like high quality exclusive content versus on YouTube. And I think on Instagram, a lot of creators feel like you have to feed the algorithm, right? Like you always have to be putting out new content because if you don't, you'll be sort of disincentivized within the algorithm and lose your viewership. And at Patreon, definitely we see that creators are getting a small group of fans, a small group of people to support them and to be members of their community and then putting out really high quality content. So I kind of see in the learning and in the creative space, there are different verticals and different spaces that can be sort of biased towards different ways of creating, whether it's very high volume and sort of putting out stuff all the time versus like really high quality stuff and you only have a few pieces.
I'd love to know how Sonora Book Club and maybe also with you, Cal, how you are incentivizing creators to join your platform. Do you want to maybe?
Sure. I have a royalty model so that I have about 2,000 instructors that have an agreement with, and so they get a percentage of either the SVOD or the TVOD sale. I agree with your comment about high quality content. I get asked all the time, why does somebody want to pay for your content when they can go to YouTube? We all hear this all the time, where they can get it free. Well, it's because it's not organized, it's not high quality. I think you can produce a lot of high volume and still have it high quality, depending on your situation, your production facilities. But it's interesting that I hear that all the time. YouTube, you can go, why not? Why do you want to pay for it? But it's because it's organized and it's high quality.
What about incentives on your side? Like, yeah.
A lot of our mentor staff comes from just a tight-knit community. We have the best guitar players in the case of our vertical in the world, basically, working on our platform. And we've built a brand that really supports them. And the learning mechanics are superior to that of if they were teaching at a normal music institution. Many of our instructors also teach at USC and Berklee College of Music. They prefer teaching with us because I think we're a lot more forward-thinking in terms of the learning mechanics, and the experience of teaching students within our platform is just it's just better. It just feels better.
Do you get any resistance from the universities? I don't know if they're like affiliated as professors or anything, where they sort of are trying to block people from joining a platform?
Haven't had that yet. No. Maybe when we haven't had it yet. It seems like they expect their instructors to be teaching on the side as well, because all of these folks have pre-established brand. They've got social following, so they kind of expect that to happen.
What about authors?
So we're earlier enough in this journey. I just was sitting judging all of your responses and figure I will steal whichever one sounded best. We really do want to get to the place where it's a business that I believe has to operate at scale. So in contrast to, say, a masterclass that is the sort of best of the best exclusively, for book club, I think it's more important that, if you think of the last 10 books that you read, it's not sufficient that we have covered one of those books. I really think if we're going to revolutionize the community and experience of reading a book and truly bringing the author regularly into that experience, we need to have 10 of 10 of the last books that you read. And so we've got to do this in a way that scales. And to do that, ultimately, I think, is dependent on getting kind of the creator tooling and economics right. Right now, we aren't there. We are sourcing everyone. We are producing everything just to kind of model the platform and the behavior that we wanted to kind of introduce people to. But it's, whether or not I get invited to this panel next year will depend on to what degree I successfully figure this out between now and then. So
I think that's the key, though, is that like the world is moving in a way where we're prioritizing the creator, where if the creator experience is good enough, if the person who's putting out art, we're really prioritizing what they need, what their experience is like. If they have an awesome time, doing a book club video or leading a book club or whatever it may be, then they're going to come back. And the platforms will be fighting to see who can be the most creator first and who can really understand what creators need and deliver that to them.
Yeah. And to add to that, creators and instructors, they have a lot of pride. They're producing this content and they want to reach their audience. They want to get it out there. So they're looking for platforms that are sizable, that have scale. They're looking to reach the masses and get their brand. They're really promoting their own brand. When you talk about a creator, they're specific to maybe a certain niche, and they're trying to reach a certain consumer. And they want to build on that audience. So when you ask about, what are they looking for? In my case, they're looking for royalty, they're looking for cash, but they're also looking to build a brand themselves. And they're looking for a large scale of a consumer to reach.
Yeah, so let's sort of complete the circle here, because you mentioned earlier we're all creators. I think we're all sort of this belief that, or maybe sort of optimism of a future where everyone teaches everyone, and we all can sort of become from student to teacher, and right, like, I'd love to know what you're all seeing in your platforms that is either telling you that that's happening, or like, how do we enable more of that? Because that feels like the answer to a lot of democratizing of education. you want to maybe kick it off?
Yeah, there's a lot happening that I'm seeing within Patreon. And for context, I'm on the data science side, so I'm like deep in the data and really curious about what's actually happening on the platform, where we see that cycle. So I think one part of it is that creators are becoming more multimodal, right? Like you're not only a podcaster or a video creator, you're also a writer, or you're a musician, but you also make music videos. And in that, there is this loop of learning, because if you're primarily a video creator, which we see a lot, and you're starting a podcast, you have to like learn how to start a podcast, and you're probably learning from other podcasters. And there's this kind of cycle of, yes, I am a master creator, and now I'm going back into being a student and learning how to do this new thing. And so I think that's a part of the cycle. The other thing we see on Patreon is that many of our creators, about a third, are also patrons. So they're not only participating as people putting out art, but as people consuming and learning and being a part of that cycle of patronage with other creators. So those are two of the things I see that I think show that trend toward that cycle of, yes, maybe I'm well established and I'm a creator, but I'm also on a learning path, and I'm also honing my craft and getting better and learning from others within the field.
There's almost a belief of the rising tide, right? Like
Right.
if you support other creators, like everyone's gonna benefit.
Yeah, and we hear that all the time from creators, because they say, hey, there's this other creator I love, and I want to promote them, I want to mention them, and I'm worried that my patrons and my members will start, supporting them instead of me. And what we see in the data is the opposite. We see that when a creator promotes another creator, they actually both make more money. They both get more members, which I find just so, makes me so optimistic for the future, right? This world where creators are talking about each other and promoting each other, and there's just an explosion of creativity that is like way more beautiful than we could have imagined.
Yeah, and value creation that comes from that as well. So Spencer, in the pre-call, you were talking about you said like your kids and definitely your kids' kids probably won't go to traditional education, and that feels like it plays into this space as well. Like, what are you seeing that's making you bullish about that kind of conviction?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same camp, I think, as everyone on the stage, in that democratization of education is the future. It will be people teaching people. The way that our platform currently exists is very central node, central curriculum, and then students around. But my vision for sort of where we're headed is we're developing these tools and these software tools for facilitating this particular type of interaction that is applicable to all kinesthetic skills. So it's sort of like the planting the seeds and building that foundation for learning mechanics that are skill-based and not knowledge-based, and then opening up a wider platform for folks to create stuff on top of that. So that's the direction, and I believe that that more democratized future is coming.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Yeah. What about you do you see readers wanting to like organize their own book clubs and like any other productive uses that they're coming up with?
Yeah, I mean, so the book club is just coming up on its first year. So we are at kind of the front door of this journey. And so far it really has been focused on bringing the author's voice and democratizing and creating accessibility to the author. But, just again, by the raise of hands, I mean, I do believe that that's an important part of what we're bringing, but I also hope that we unlock the community and the creation and unlock the non-consumption of book clubs. Like, success will ultimately be probably, statistically, if you have 10 books on your nightstand, do we have all 10 of them on our platform? Like, I do believe that's a kind of prerequisite to our success. And then ultimately, probably the next is, if you want to be in a book club, are you? Because, I mean, as we saw, like right now by the raise of hands, it's probably about 80% of people who want to be in a book club aren't in a book club. And so I think there's a huge kind of opportunity there. In terms of, just the future and, a little bit of a deviation, but I flew here from Guatemala, which is where my kid's school is right now. Because we are in a micro school. It's the ability, you said, the future is people teaching people. Is that how you framed it? Which at some level, it's always been people teaching people, but we forget that at some level, and it's sort of teacher teaching students, the system teaching students, but of course it's it's always been kind of people teaching people, but I think our ability to facilitate that. So if you're here, Prenda Education is kind of facilitating that model. I was introduced to another, I don't have their name, here in San Diego. So it's just facilitating kind of these micro schools, these pods. I do believe that marketplace model will enable us to find educators, subject matter experts, tutors, just so much more efficiently. And if you can have the faith and trust to kind of step into that future, which we did this last year, in part because of COVID, in part just because I believe it's the future and we were committed to it even before COVID came. Like, there is already, you can sort of already, we have kids of different ages, you can already learn essentially anything you need to at this point in a creator kind of marketplace world.
I was going to add to that, it's an interesting question, and as I've said before, everybody's a creator or a maker, but we actually do things on our platform to help that consumer become a creator, become an instructor. We actually have classes on how to be an instructor, how to shoot your own video so that you can teach someone else. So we try to engage with the consumer and the members of our platforms to really reach out and create their own content. And we might share some of that content. Now, a lot of times it's not very good content because they're shooting with their phones or whatever else it might be, but we may put it out there on the platform and let other people see what has been created by the actual member. And a lot of these people, creators, they aspire to be an instructor, to have their own brand. And what we try to do is try to engage with them and try to help them along that way.
Yeah, or they can start a Patreon and do it themselves, which is great. There's so many opportunities to monetize knowledge. So let's talk about one or two challenges that you guys talked about on the pre-core. I wasn't on this pre-core, so we've been like catching up here with each other as we go, and sort of get into sort of the solution mode of how we might think about solving these. So the first one I want to talk about is proof of work, credentialing, proof of qualification. Does anybody have a strong thought on that one?
I love that question, which is like, what is the world going to look like when everyone's teaching everyone and like you maybe don't have a degree from a 4-year university? And I think we're seeing that in some areas, like software development, I think is a great example where like you can learn to be a software engineer on your own, and your credentialing is like the work speaks for itself, right? You basically like do a coding problem and you show that you know how to do it. So I do think that there will be new forms of sort of proof of skill that are not necessarily formal credentials, where you can just show that you know what you know.
What does that look like? Is it like portfolio of work?
Yeah, I don't know yet, but I think that we can see that in certain industries. Like I think that you can see, you do have there are examples like if you want to be a general contractor, you like have to pass certain certifications or pass certain tests. But if you want to be like a concert violinist, you just play an amazing piece of music, right? There are still lots of credentials in classical music, but I think that we can look at some of these models, like what's happening in software engineering, and say, okay, what would that look like if we applied that to becoming a teacher, if we applied that to becoming a doctor or a lawyer, which I think will also look very, very different in 20 years. But I think there needs to be some like systems and technologies built up around that. I don't think we're there yet today.
Yeah.
Yeah, what about the gatekeepers? Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a major question of how will systems that do that gatekeeping be potentially dismantled or maybe reinvented and have new technologies that come and say, hey, here's a new way to show that you know what you do know. But I think that, obviously that's a massive challenge in Boulder.
We do some of that with digital badges, and people, they take a class or a long class and they want to show people that they did it. Yeah. So you give them a digital badge and they might put it on their Facebook page or some of their other social channels just so they're proud. Yeah. They're proud of it. Now again, you said it's not formal. The certificates in most businesses I'm seeing are informal, meaning they don't really have any value. Yeah. You're not going to really get anything out of it other than, hey, it's a feel-good thing.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I do think credentials play a place, right? There's a reason we have standards, and there's a reason we have credentials. It's so that we all agree that, for example, like the doctor operating on us is going to do a good job and be safe. So you can't be like fully uncredentialed. I just do think that with a totally democratized world of learning, there will be new ways of getting at that same goal.
Yeah, I think an interesting play here is co-signing, like having your reputation, reinforced by others, and that network effect of at some point you're just like, yeah, okay, that person knows exactly how to do that thing. I want to go to some audience questions. I've got one more, so if anybody has a question, I'll come to you right now. Maybe we'll start with you, Carl. What other channels are you starting to think about for people as creative outlets?
Channels for distribution?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're looking at every channel you can think of. I mean, every device, obviously, any channels like OTT channels. We're looking at distribution in any way we can, including, I'm taking my content into libraries now. I'm taking it into schools, taking it into the workplace. So, it's not just a B2C play for me. It's a multi-global world out there that you got to take that content. And one of my focuses right now is to take it international. I'm in 200 countries right now, but I haven't localized. I haven't localized my content, but I'm in the process of localizing Craftsy and launching that in Espanol. And I'm anxious to see if new distribution channels will show up when you're starting to target Spanish-speaking consumers with Spanish content. So I haven't done that, and I'm in the process of doing that. So it's exciting because I think the global distribution is huge for content.
Anything else you guys are seeing on your platform in terms of just even creative outlets for people to, you mentioned video is a big one on Patreon. Like, what else are people getting into in terms of getting content out there?
Yeah, I mean, Patreon is, I think, and when we think about the internet and the possibilities of where that content lives, it's like pretty endless. But I think that like gaming and interaction and sort of like interactive content, interactive learning is something that is becoming bigger and bigger. I think video is, huge, but only getting bigger in the way that people experience video, the way they interact with it, the community they build around it. So definitely like lots of possibilities there for what that content looks like.
Awesome. Anybody have a question for the panel? Yes.
This has been amazing. Thank you very much. For book club, I was on the website, and right now for authors, there's a wait list. And so my question is, how long is the wait list, and what is the criteria to, like, how are you guys picking?
It's super long. And don't tell anyone otherwise. We're a year old. We're a small team, just scaling up. It really is just a matter of like being able to handle things, and a lot of it's like expectation setting. Like, remember, guys, we are a small team that is a year old. We're mostly we've got a really nice pipeline of authors coming in. Sort of the we are doing some curation. We want to sort of step out with strong titles, great authors. We do and are building this to be a platform for all authors. So ultimately, there is no set of criteria that we filter anyone in or out by. But right now, it is just kind of like modeling and picking titles and authors that we believe will help us grow and get the word out there. So that's kind of how it's prioritized at the moment.
All right. So you had a hand up, and then I'll come over here.
I was going to ask, how are you using live classes, or are you? Because you mentioned video with people using Zoom in the pandemic. Have you started doing more like live content?
We do a bunch of live classes. Every day of the week, basically, there's a live class. The mechanics of it are super fun. There are cool tools out there. One called that we use pretty frequently for teaching in a live setting that allows you to kind of do this. It's kind of like the DJ-ification of live classes, where it's some mix of like a live teacher, and then they can queue up videos, and they can get, have feedback from students in real time. It's pretty cool. So.
Was that an onomatopoeia? What was that name?
It's called It's Phil Libin, super cool company. It's brand new out of a product shop called All Turtles, and it's the sound that you make most frequently on a Zoom call.
That's great.
That's a good question on live. I think live is very important. And what we do is we communicate with our members in specific niches, and we invite them to a live event. And then they can ask questions, they can interact with the instructor. They may even send video of themselves in during that time. So it's really an engagement, and that's what you're really looking for. But it's a nice benefit when you have video and it's live.
What about in real life? Is that something you guys are starting to think about?
That people do that still?
What is that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We did to great success. We had so one of the book clubs that we've launched is Bellatrix, which is Emma Roberts and Kara Priest, and they did a book club brunch with authors and kind of the media in New York. So it's still happening.
Yeah. And it's sort of that proximity, location-based stuff you were saying as well. Yeah.
I thought I was on Zoom right now. Right?
Yeah.
We're not in the
All right, we're going to come to this gentleman over here, and then I'll come back over there. Reaching diverse populations. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at Patreon, one of the biggest things we've been doing for the past 2 years is internationalizing. So until recently, we were only in the US, and you could only pay a creator in US dollars. And now, we have, I think, 7 currencies and we just launched Chinese last week and are expanding to new markets. I do think with the internet, there is reach, but there is also, you have to be intentional about where that reach is. You have to build tools that people can actually use if they're on a poor connection or if they don't have the latest smartphone. And so I think accessibility is a big part of that, and then internationalization is the second part. But the truth is that creators are global, right? And learners are global. And so we know that in order to serve all creators and all people that want to be patrons, we have to be in every country and every language and have to also build a product that can work in all of those places as well. So it's been a huge focus for us. And I think we're only at the beginning of that journey.
Spencer, did you want to jump in there?
For us, we're sort of like a premium product. So what we do for diverse populations, especially if there's an economic gap, is we just scholarships. We have a huge scholarship fund, and we just let a bunch of folks in, some often for free, if they are an awesome fit for the program and wouldn't otherwise be able to access the education.
Have any of you seen purchasing power parity being put into play? There's you can get parity bar as an app that you can put in, and it'll know based on the IP location of the person, and it'll offer them a code to sign up. Any of you seen that being used?
No, it sounds awesome though.
Yeah. Paritybar.com.
Cool.
Yeah.
Not sponsored.
Yeah.
One more question in the corner.
What do you guys think about, and for those of you who are serving both the D2C and the B2B, when you think about, or thinking about maybe shifting from one to the other, what kind of platform or overall adjustments have you seen to go from consumers to businesses or libraries or schools or others?
Well, I can answer a little bit. It's tricky because you're reaching a consumer at one level, and then when you go into a B2B play, like into the libraries, or I'm really serving up the same content in a lot of different channels and a lot of different ways. So I think you have to look at each one of those situations individually and determine how you're going to, even how much you charge. Because a consumer might look on my platform and get it at one price, and then they go to a B2B platform or the libraries, and it's going to be a different cost. So it's a tricky question.
Yeah, I think there's a tension too with, especially with larger tech companies. The consumer doesn't necessarily want to have a relationship with a tech company. Like if I'm learning to surf right now, and I don't think, oh, I'm learning to surf on YouTube. I think, oh, I'm learning to surf from Cale Brock, who's this awesome surfing creator on YouTube. And so at Patreon, we play a delicate balance because we're going after the creator, after the business, and making sure we're building for them. But they have all these consumers, and technically, those consumers are taking out their wallets and giving money on our platform. But I do think that the platforms need to step back and let the creator own the relationship with their fans, with their learners. Because at the end of the day, going back to that, learning is intimate, and it's about the creator, it's about the educator. You want to have that relationship with the person teaching you, not with this mega corporation.
So I'd love to end off with sort of a final thought from each of you on how do we further democratize education? How do we encourage more lifelong learning? and really kind of spread this thing across the globe. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind to me was bringing us back to community. Like, if you feel that you're in community and you feel you're supported and you're excited about learning and you have that energy about it, that's going to spread it more, right? You're going to talk to your friends and say, wow, I went to this amazing book club and it felt so awesome. And I was chatting with all my best friends. So I think it's creating strong communities, and those communities need management and strong community managers. And then really that enables it to be fully democratized for people to find those communities and feel at home in them and be committed to learning more in them.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's about modeling the behavior that we want to see in the world. So if we want lifelong learning to be a thing that is generally common amongst every single human, it's just modeling the type of person that does that and the benefits that it has to your own personal fulfillment and wellness.
Yeah, tap into aspirations, yeah. David?
+1.
Cal, any final thoughts?
No, just, I go back to technology and personalization. I think that to continue to grow, to increase your LTVs, I think it's going to come down to the platforms and what your technologists can do to help support what the consumer wants. So that's how I would end my comment.
Serving content to the consumer. Yeah, Cal, David, Spencer, Maura, thank you so much. It was really good fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.